Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing the 25.11 ADC tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes last patch. We most notably saw changes to the likes of AP Twitch. We saw a buff towards Sivers W. We saw a buff towards, well, a slight adjustment towards Samira, and an adjustment / quality of life buff towards Ashe, which was very nice for her. In terms of nerfs, we saw a nerf towards Lucian's E, which was a pretty effective nerf, and a nerf towards Smolder's base health regen and armor, I believe. Other than that, I've adjusted some other things around, but let's get into it. So the D tier is going to consist of one champion who is being nerfed in 25.12, and that is Kalista. Kalista is by far and away the weakest marksman in the game at the moment. Her biggest issue is just how pro-bound she is. Like, her competitive binding is really aggressive at the moment, mostly through the fact that she's a very early game dominant marksman, which can usually see his push quite aggressively, and pairs really nicely with some of the meta supports at the moment. The likes of Nico, who is also being nerfed in 25.12, is one of her common pairings, and she is performing very well at the moment. The likes of Renata, she can also pair quite nicely with. Like, Kalista, if you are playing in a duo, can still be playable. I don't think she's unplayable by any means at the moment. She is just very clearly the weakest marksman option to go to, especially if you're playing solo queue. I just wouldn't recommend this pick. Moving on to the C tier, then we lead off with Brand, who is probably the weakest of the mage options at the moment. He's pretty heavily bound to certain pairings. The likes of Nami perform well with him, but as a champion, he's just under the bar at the moment. He's not in a particularly good spot. And for the average like elo bracket where he should be most performant, he just isn't really a great champion to recommend at the moment. Draven sits towards the low end of the C tier. If you can stable advantages and you play this champion really well, he can be a really good option to climb with, especially like smurfing wise as well. If you're not comfortable playing Draven, I would recommend completely avoiding this champion. You need to be able to forge leads, you need to be able to close out games early, and if you don't do that, this champion really loses a lot of its value within the game. Aphelios, don't think this champion's bad by any means. He's just very hard and unique to play. He's being buffed in 25.12, which is good to see. I think Aphelios as a champion is pretty unique in the game, and seeing him maybe pop up at MSI or pop up more in solo queue is, yeah, should be a good thing. I think Aphelios as a champion, I'd actually recommend giving him a try. Albeit he is, slightly weaker at the moment, but with, games and time into him, you can easily make this champion compete with some of the better marksmen in the game at the moment. Kai'Sa sits within the C tier still. She's fine. She's a bit too reliant on certain pairings at the moment to really be as strong and valuable in solo queue at the moment. Like, when Kai'Sa is really good is when she's a bit more agnostic in what she can function with, and she has more flexibility within builds. We've seen some variations of like crit and AP Kai'Sa pop up a bit more. I think over time she'll probably be more of a B tier option. At the moment, though, I'm not that big of a fan of recommending Kai'Sa. I also think she's quite a hard and unique marksman to play, and I overall, just don't really recommend the champion, so I leave her in the C tier for that reason. Zeri sits within the C tier. She's receiving a pretty large buff next patch. Should definitely be aware and like watching this champion. I think she could even be pushed all the way up to the likes of the A tier. Right now, though, she sits as a high C tier option. I think she's a good pick if you are very comfortable pairing her alongside an enchanter. If you're not comfortable playing Zeri, I'd recommend just avoiding the champion altogether at the moment. Mel sits within the C tier. This champion has very aggressive burst ranges and has pretty, if you maxed in the right skill order, like the E-max variation of Mel, she looks pretty promising as a champion. I think Mel overall is probably more of a B tier pick these days, but I have her in the C tier because most people still like opt into like incorrect skill order and don't really pilot the champion as correctly as they probably should do. I think over time, though, Mel will be mastered a bit better and will probably end up being pushed up to the B tier. If anything, she could probably do with some slight adjustments. I know this champion is in a pretty frustrating spot at the moment with the point and click burst she has accessible to her, which might not be quite the healthiest thing for a champion like this to have within its kit. Ezreal and Samira wrap up the C tier. In the case of Ezreal, he's very dependent on like the performance of the player. I think this champion can drop all the way down to like the C, the D tier if you don't pilot him well. If you pilot him really well, he is one of the best options within the game. I think this champion will definitely, for the most part, see play at MSI. I think his safety net combined with the the unconventional DPS output of the champion can be a pretty big selling point. Plus, if you enjoy playing champions with skill shots and you're very consistent at rotating and landing your skill shots, I think Ezreal can be a really good option. I'd say he probably sits as more like a low B tier option, but yeah, I'd say B/C tier is probably a good place for him to sit. Samira sits at the high end of the C tier now. B changes were positive for her. Probably needs a bit more, and she is getting a bit more in 25.12. In fact, she's getting a lot more in 25.12. I believe it is a flat 5 damage on Q, and then one other change, I can't specifically remember what it was. Oh, it was movement speed on the passive, which is really big for her. So Samira, a champion I'd recommend trying at least now, and is being buffed in 25.12, so should have a very good trajectory of like power curve. Moving up to the B tier then, we lead off with like mages such as Lux and Ziggs and Veigar. I think these are like my B tier mages. Let's grab the right ones. So in the case of Lux, she is a bit more dependent on like on player and just like understanding the champion. If you don't understand Lux's lethal ranges and you don't really pilot the champion as well, you probably won't bring Lux into the bot lane role that often. In the case of Veigar, I think Veigar has effectively has a very good time in mid to low MMR brackets. Really struggles once you go mid to high MMR brackets though, which is why I can't really recommend him as much as like a higher option. I think if he was buffed, he would definitely compete with some of the A tier picks though. In the case of Ziggs, he's just been fine for a while now. I think this champion's just a bit below the bar. He's not a bad bot lane option by any means, but he's not incredible either, and I think there are just better AP options which I'd recommend over him. Some of the other B tier options include the likes of Xayah, who I think in the right spots can be a really valuable champion to play. Being able to have the self-peeling tools and the damage she can output can be really valuable in certain compositions. If you pick her in the wrong spot, she becomes a lot less valuable than other marksman options. Caitlyn, I think if you can abuse her laning phase correctly and you understand the power curve of this champion, that is the kind of main reward of this pick. If you execute her combos poorly and you don't really exploit the fact that she is a 650 range marksman early onto the game, I'd recommend just playing a different champion. Those are like the key selling points of a pick like this. Corki and Varus, obviously very, very strong elite skewed staples. In the case of Varus, lethality does perform better at the moment, albeit requires more setup and usually like better team compositions to kind of perform on. But in the case of on-hit Varus, obviously playing it into like short-range DPS or like compositions with like health stacking can be really valuable. So Varus, I think his flexibility is really rewarding at the moment. He's obviously an incredibly competitively and elite skewed pick purely because of his setup from his ultimate and the amount of rage he can like inhibit through his kit. In the case of Corki, his elite presence mainly comes from the fact that he's an early game skewed champion with great wave clear and is just very stat checky in the nature of how he plays. Doesn't perform as well in mid to low elo, but is the nature of a lot of early game champions. Just Samira's and Dravens, for example, are early game skewed. I mean, Samira does have a late game skew once you like carve back up because of her ability to just wipe fights. But like, for example, yeah, just like the early game champions traditionally struggle a lot more in lower MMR brackets because they need to facilitate and like close out games early, and the average game length just goes on too long in those elo brackets for them to be as rewarding as some of the other options here. Moving on to the A tier then, we lead off with Sivir, who is actually probably more of an high A tier option. She is just strictly buffed all the way up until level 13 now, which is massive for Sivir, being able to output more DPS with W, more consistently clear waves, get more chip damage, just has given her a lot of power. So Sivir, really do recommend just giving her a try now. She's a very easy to play marksman. I think Sivir has landed in a spot which is more acceptable for a champion of kind of her class. Moving on to some of the other A-tier picks, Seraphine remains as an A-tier option. She's not performing as well at the moment. I actually think she could maybe even drop down to the B-tier. She's still a good jack of all trades champion though, being able to provide damage, CC, utility. All those things can be really valuable in a kit, but just isn't as performant at the moment. Some of the other major options I do just strictly recommend over her. However, in between those, I have Twitch and Vayne. I think these are great solo queue champions, especially in mid to low elo, where certain aspects of their kit can be like harder for those average and like lower MMR players to kind of play against. In the case of Twitch, it's his invis and then just his like flanking ability with the amount of damage he can output with an advantage. In case of Vayne, give her like a couple of items on either the primarily like playing on Q build or just the consistently. Oh my god, English. You have the two Vayne builds. You have the opt into the Q damage, like play like your Essence Reaver, Trinity builds, like we've seen some of those, or you play the like Krakens, the Statics, the There's one other item which I'm missing off the top of my head. The Bork's variations, we've seen like Ginsu's in amongst there. She can opt into a decent plethora of items and still be rewarding depending on which way you want to play her. She does struggle, especially in bot lane, in elite play though. Her short range combined with her reliance on scaling does make her quite bad in those brackets, which is why if you're looking for a champion to maybe play all the way up, she's not quite as good of an option. But if you're an OTP, you play with a mid to low elo, then I think, yeah, Vayne is a good option there still for you at the moment. Some of your mages within the A tier include the likes of Hui, Karthus, and Swain. Karthus is incredibly underplayed at the moment. Most people just won't know how to play against him. And if you are paired with like a Nami or a Leona or just some of these champions which can either lock down the target or like amplify your kit, Karthus is an incredibly valuable champion. I do recommend at least giving him a try, maybe once. He's definitely... he's borderline overpowered within the bot lane, just so unpopular that Riot won't willingly nerf him because there's, well, not a huge point because he just doesn't support enough of a player base and doesn't, like, win enough games to kind of merit it. In the case of Swain is incredibly composition dependent. Play him into low damage melee compositions and you'll be massively rewarded for having a champion like this within your arsenal. I do recommend at least trying him, kind of akin to Karthus, at least once, and getting a feel for the kit and seeing if you just want to inherit him into your pool. Hui is my number one mage though. I think Hui is just a great bot laner, being able to provide so many like different tools combined with his range, his abilities to stall out, and most ADCs not being able to assail him correctly. I think he is a very rewarding mage to just play and have within your pool. He's probably my number one recommendation, and then Ziggs would probably be my number two, but if you're looking for something maybe a bit stronger and a bit more unique, then yeah, your Swains and Karthuses are there for sure. Other picks within the A tier include the likes of Ashe, whose quality of life buff this patch was really nice for her, being able to stack up Q on tower, enables her to siege a bit quicker, enables her to like actually trade a bit better depending on like what kind of fight you're looking at, and I definitely do recommend this pick almost all the time as a champion within your pool because of the utility aspects of the champion. Kog'Maw is still a good pick. I still think he pairs really nicely with some of your enchanters and even your engage supports like your Brahms, for example. I say Braum, counter engage Braum, or even some of your engage supports like your Nautiluses, for example. I think Kog'Maw can pair quite nicely alongside them. He is deceptively strong early. Most people don't realize that Ginsu's is an early game skewed item. You should abuse the fact that once you're on Ginsu spike, he is very, very oppressive, and most champions cannot match you on like your W kind of like uptime spike. So definitely, I think he's a very misunderstood champion. I would really recommend giving him a go if you haven't already. Jhin sits within the A tier. He's your good old A tier option. Provides damage, provides utility, doesn't have consistent enough DPS to really compete with some of the maybe other options within the pool. Doesn't really need to though in his current state. I think he's been given decent buffs recently to kind of enable him to spike a bit better later on into the game. And when you're on your like 3-4 item spikes, you can like 2-3 shot targets and be really valuable in games. So Jhin, I think he's a great option at the moment, very deserving of an A tier spot. Dropping down from the S tier, we have Smolder and Lucian. In the case of Lucian, the ECD nerf was enough. It hurts his trading patterns early on to lane, so you are now more reliant on putting points in that ability second rather than having points in W second. Overall, he's a bit weaker. He's just gone from being an S tier option to an A tier option. He's still good though. I still think if you can pilot him well, he's still a rewarding marksman and really spikes in the mid game on like your 1-2 item spikes and pairs quite nicely with like some of the pool depending on the support pool depending on what you need from his kit. In the case of Smolder, he still feels like that inevitable champion. Now that the stacks have been buffed on this pick, he does feel more rewarding to play. That being said though, he has lost some durability, and that is meaningful. He is no longer going to be able to just outright survive lanes early onto the game, and you have to an extent, either trade back or forego getting some of your stacks to more effectively like be viable within the game. So yeah, he also drops down to the A tier. This pick is a bit weaker now. Moving on to the S tier then, we lead off with Yasuo. Yasuo still remains as an S tier option. Still think this pick is incredibly good against like 90% of the bot lane pool. Most people won't know how to play against him correctly, and if you play Yasuo, he is an incredibly strong flex option in his current state as well. So Yasuo, pick I really do recommend. Is a bit support dependent and can be matchup dependent to an extent. So that does like mark him down slightly, but still an S tier option. Nyla, also traditionally support dependent. Like if you play Nyla with supports which don't really support her playstyle, she will struggle a lot more. That being said though, she is probably #1 marksman in the game if you pair her alongside one of her strong like options. She's incredibly, her damage is incredibly high, her W is an incredibly strong tool, especially against certain team compositions, and that does give her a huge amount of value. The other picks which remain in the S tier are Tristana and MF. I recommend just having these picks within your main pool at the moment. Tristana, ever since her changes and like the build optimizations, has been like riding high as a champion, either sitting within the A or even to like the S plus before her like nerfs to our ultimate. I think this champion's in a really good spot at the moment. I do recommend playing her. Her damage, yeah, is really high. Her snowball potential, her scaling, her early game. There's just a lot of things really going well for this champion at the moment. If you're looking for something a bit easier, MF's still a great option. Even as he's a competitive play at the moment, her sustain through like BT first or just like some of those more damage orientated builds can be really oppressive. Her team fighting, her pairings with like your rails and stuff can also be really strong. Her laning phase is incredibly potent, and her ability to just move around the map with her W does just give her a lot of power. 2 champions left. So Jinx drops down from the S plus to the S tier. This pick is still really good. Still really recommend her for solo queue. It's like one of my at least top 3 solo queue recommendation options. Her ability to snowball, siege, takeover games can all be really valuable. Her global like capability with the ultimate as well does give her strength. So, like this champion just has a lot of things going for her. The main weakness of Jinx is she doesn't have great self-peeling tools. Like her W is a strong solo but single target, and her E can be played around quite easily. So there are weaknesses to this champion which make you a bit more support dependent, and that does punish you to an extent. That being said though, my #1 option is Senna. I misread Senna. I had Senna in the B tier last patch because I didn't think she would so aggressively go from like Senna's a funny one. So 25.9, Senna got buffed. Was it 25.9? Yeah, it was 25.9. Senna got buffed, I believe. And the buffs, I might not even be remembering history correctly at the moment. 25.9. Let's have a look. I don't want to like get my facts wrong. So 25.9, Senna ADC was basically not played whatsoever. The champion was incredibly unpopular, and Static Shiv was like her 7th most popular item. Like, it's crazy to think about, because by 25.10, Static Shiv has become her most popular item in the game. Cleaver has become her 2nd most popular item, like after like Static into Cleaver, and suddenly the champion, which looked really bad on paper, looks really good on paper, because people like managed to correctly itemize this champion within like 2 weeks. Not even like within a week. Like once people started playing Senna again, people were like, "Yep, Static Cleaver. This is the correct build to go." Everyone's playing this. Everyone's playing the correct, like, for the most part, the correct line of, like, the build paths. And, like, your Yomus, your collectors are just not being built anymore. Which is fascinating to see, because this item was built, I want to say, 40 times or something on 25.9. Let's have a look. So on 25.9, Static in Gold Plus was built 215 times, as opposed to Collector, which was built 2,900 times. Right now, on 25.11 in Gold Plus as well, Static has been bought 500,000 times. It's crazy to think about. Anyway, all this is to say, I misread the situation. Senna should have been in the S plus tier. She's blatantly overpowered, and she's the pick of the patch. She's being nerfed in 25.12, rightfully so. She's in a very good spot at the moment. Still though, I recommend playing her till the end of this patch, and then once she's nerfed, looking at some of the S tier options as like good go-tos, and even some of the A tier options. I think there's a lot of things which can really be opted into at the moment and work quite nicely. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.